new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSM.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you enjoyed the first two segments. We are going to take a little bit of a break from NFL talk for just a little while and transition into the wild world of college football. Talking about some fantasy college football. If there are any fantasy college football fans, make yourselves known in the chat. I would love to hear your opinions on this segment. But these are my personal fantasy stars of the week. And we actually have 5 here for the college football weekend. And it was a wacky one in that certain things went to plan, but there were some performances that I'm going to mention that were excellent in their own right, but also left room for improvement. And what I mean by that is all these performances here are from players who generally were integral to their team winning. But that doesn't mean that there were mistakes made by these players that could be improved upon as the season goes on, especially some who are vying for the CFC spots, because there are some top 25 contenders and there are some CFP contenders in here as well I'm going to be talking about. So without further ado, let's break each and every single one of them down. Starting off with the QB position, this was kind of a tough weekend to pick QBs because some of the top QBs were on bye weeks, such as Cam Ward, and the Dylan Gabriel performance I did not necessarily get around to. It was late at night, and I thought this guy's performance leads perfectly into some discussions that I want to have throughout the week concerning fantasy college football. And that young man is Carson Beck. He generally had a fantastic game against one of the weaker teams in the SEC in Mississippi State. 36 of 48 passing, 459 yards, 3 touchdowns. Generally a very good game from a guy who's showing a lot of promise and could be the number 1 QB taken in the 2025 NFL Draft. But the reason why I mention the fact that some of these players had mistakes in this game and they want to be improved upon is because Carson Beck, as gaudy as those stats look and as good as they look on paper, I'm not even mentioning the 2 interceptions. He had 29.2 fantasy points, but the 2 interceptions are what stand out to me. And the score of that game as well stand out to me. Georgia won, but only by 10 points because a Mississippi State team they let hang around a little bit too much. This is a team that over the past couple of weeks hasn't had consistent enough performances to really make me think that if they get the CFP, they can truly contend for the national title again. Whether it was against Alabama, where it took them a half to figure things out, or now against Mississippi State, where they let them hang around late into the fourth quarter. This team really worries me. And it all stems from Carson Beck's play. Because as much as the stats look nice on paper, like I said, his erratic natures are really coming forth at the worst possible time. And it already cost him once against Bama. But you perhaps have the toughest closing schedule of any team in the SEC this season. This week you're going to Texas. You still have to play at Ole Miss. You still have to play, I believe, Tennessee. And who knows what your record's going to look like out of those 3 games. You could have 3 to 4 losses even. So Carson Beck's importance to this team is really shining through in the good and the bad moments for him. This performance generally was good, perhaps even great, but I can't look past the fact that if he is not consistent for this offense, it's not a good offense. You can exploit this offense way more than you could have 2 or 3 years ago, and the defense as well. So you're going to need a comprehensive performance from Carson Beck this weekend to truly let me believe that Georgia are true contenders and perhaps the biggest contender to Texas in the national title race. But for this week alone, I'm giving Carson Beck credit where credit is due for his stat line. For the running back position, Phil Maffa of the Clemson Bulldogs makes his return. Now, Phil Maffa has always quietly, to me, been one of college football's most impressive players. Because in that Clemson team, right, a team not necessarily built upon transfer portal additions or money, Phil Maffa completely embodies the Clemson identity of someone working his way into the system, being so effective, perhaps the most effective player for Clemson over the past couple of years, and cementing himself as perhaps one of the premier college football running backs in the nation. Really goes to show how Clemson have really turned their season around and turned the kind of cultural narrative of the past couple of months around as well for them. Because to start the season, they looked appalling against Georgia. But now, with this new and improved offense, the sky's the limit for Clemson, and Phil Maffa could be a big part of that. Because as much as we talk about Clay Klubnik, we also have to talk about Phil Maffa. 19 carries, 108 yards, 2 touchdowns, for a total of 23.6 fantasy points in this game for him. And when I think about Clemson going forward, they should have a manageable schedule, right? They still have to face, I believe, Pitt. They have a tough non-conference game against South Carolina. But for the most part, nobody on their schedule really scares you if you really look at it. So, the important thing for the Clemson Bulldogs, the Tigers actually, I don't know why I said that. The Clemson Tigers, I'm sorry for that, another typo in my graphics. But the MO should be to keep on maintaining this offensive output from both of these players, in Cade Klubnik and Phil Maffa, because if Cade Klubnik continues to play well, then it opens up a lot of avenues for Phil Maffa. However, if Cade Klubnik kind of regresses back to what we expected out of him to start the season, then Phil Maffa could become the focal point of this Clemson offense. So it's really going to be a balancing act to both of these players. And Cade Klubnik has found himself on this Fantasy Stars list for several weeks now. So, looking at this Clemson team, I feel like this offense really can round into form and find a comfortability that will lead it far into the playoffs. And Phil Maffa could be at the center of it. But for now, he's just making his second straight appearance on my College Football Fantasy Stars of the Week list. At the wide receiver position, making his debut, is someone who you may not have ever heard of, especially me to at least start the season, but now might beginning to get known if his team stays the Big Ten race, and that is Pat Bryant. Illinois Fighting Illini. I needed all of his 104 yards and his touchdown, especially, and his 19.9 fantasy points for Illinois to escape a very weird game against Purdue where they seemed to be in control. But ultimately, Purdue took the lead, left a little bit too much time. Illinois kicked the field goal, went to overtime, scored a touchdown. Purdue scored it yet again, but then failed on the 2-point try. So a very bizarre Big Ten game for Illinois, but still, they remain in contention in the Big Ten. And not for nothing, that means that more high-profile games are in their future. I'm not sure who they play yet. I may just have to pull up their schedule here. But I do believe that if they can reach the Big Ten championship game, as they play Michigan and Oregon in the next 2 weeks, 2 huge games for their Big Ten title hopes, I feel like someone on the offense is going to have to step up as well. Because, much as I love Luke Altmaier, in these bigger games, I kind of expect him to lose his luster a little bit, because he still is someone who is quite raw in his development as a college football quarterback. He's going to need weapons to rely upon. Pat Bryant's name has come up in Illinois circles as someone who could be that guy on the offensive side of the football. They have a couple injuries on the offensive side. I believe Kaden Fagan, their running back, has gone down with an injury, might miss a couple of weeks. So it's going to be highly integral to incorporate at least some wide receivers in this team to get going. And so Pat Bryant is going to need to maintain this level of success we've seen in Big Ten play thus far in these next 2 games to really determine as Manic Particularity enters the chat as well. Welcome to you, my friend. I think that this game for him was very important, Pat Bryant, because it shows that Illinois can be a multi-dimensional team in the Big 12. Now, my last player that I want to highlight here, at least in this graphic, at the very least, had a very special performance for a player of his position. A very special performance. Tied the record for most catches by a tight end in college football with 17, had perhaps the highest yardage total of any tight end in the history of the sport. And that is Tyler Warren. This guy is someone who, for Penn State, I actually feel needs to have quieter games, and here's why. As much as I love a tight end who can elevate his team's offense and potentially be someone who can put up fantastic numbers and win you football games, that can't be the case going forward for Penn State, because it's dangerous to rely on a tight end as perhaps your best player. And not for nothing, we've seen signs of improvement from this Penn State offense that go to show that they're more than just Tyler Warren. He was a special player, but at some point, he needs to understand that in order for this team to win, he might have to take the back seat a little bit. But this performance was much needed in this comeback effort against USC, and there may be more in his future. Who knows? 17 receptions, 224 yards, 1 touchdown, 37.7 fantasy points for him. But what I'm looking for out of Penn State most importantly is not just, consistent play from their best weapons, but play that carries over into the most important games. And we saw it this weekend against USC, where you needed a solid superstar performance from one of your best players, and it came from Tyler Warren. Now, if Penn State are to win the Big Ten, however, they need performances from the running backs, 2 of the best running backs in college football, and Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen. They need it from Omari Evans, their young freshman receiver. They need it from Harrison Wallace, and they need it most importantly from Drew Aller. What I liked about Tyler Warren's performance was that it sprung an element of surprise, because he, much like Kmet, was involved in a lot of different things for the offense. But at the end of the day, Penn State are a weird team to diagnose right now because of the fact that their offense hasn't necessarily had one player who has been the main focus. Potentially that could be a good thing, but I'm worried about how it becomes too Tyler Warren-centric at some point, and they ultimately lose ground in the Big Ten race. But it's ultimately up to interpretation. But the last guy I want to mention here, not mentioned in my graphic here, is Gunnar Helm. And talk about superstar tight ends. 5 receptions, 91 yards, 1 touchdown, 17.6 fantasy points for him. Just going to show how versatile he can be for Texas in this kind of skill position group. Stacked at every single skill position Texas are. Gunnar Helm is proven to be someone who is a physical body on the field you have to account for if you're an opposing defense. And he can run roughshod over you and take control of a game if you give him the chance. So going forward, Gunnar Helm's star is only going to rise. And he's someone who I see as potentially a game wrecker in the playoff when Texas gets there. Because you can't necessarily account for someone of his size and his physicality at the tight end position. But let me know what you think about these college football fantasy stars as we transition back yet again to the world of NFL, making some bold fantasy predictions. Don't be surprised if someone makes its triumphant return. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about that. Don't go anywhere.